Hello, my name is Curci, and this is the review for Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2. This game got a lot of negative reviews. They still gave it credit for what it did right, but destroyed it on what it did wrong. What is claimed to be arguably its biggest sin was how it seemed to take a step back from what is expected from a Castlevania game. But in my opinion, who gives a f***? Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 was an awesome game that, for the most part, I couldn't put down. The character that this game put me in control of was a fantastic experience and one that I would want more of. For the first time in a Castlevania game, you play as Dracula, and as cool as it sounds, it doesn't come close to what you'll experience in-game, and I mean that in a good way. The basic plot of the story realistically picks up moments after the post-credits scene from the first Lords of Shadow game, when Dracula awakens after centuries of sleeping and is recruited to fight against Satan's minions who are preparing for the Devil's return. The game gives a very quick and easy tutorial in the first moments of the game before giving a very in-depth backstory that bridges how the previous games end and to the modern day time of this game. The long centuries of sleep and clear feeble look of Dracula in the beginning of the game is the perfect excuse as to why Dracula wouldn't have all of his powers in the start of the game, allowing the player to collect experience points to level up and upgrade specific powers. The game really takes place in two different time periods, the modern day setting where all the plot really gets moving, and Dracula's castle where Dracula often visits to regain a lost power. I often wondered if the castle setting was either taking place in Dracula's head or if he was actually time traveling, and the game never really explains it, but by the end of the game I just simply assumed it was just an alternate reality, but I do wish that the game had put a little bit into focus as to what was actually going on. The castle setting was awesome looking and very much what one would expect to see in a Castlevania game. Even the enemies you fight there are very fitting. It's the modern day setting that was odd to me. Besides the buildings, streets, and technology, there were enemies with jetpack power suits, mutant gun-wielding creatures, and large mechs. It wasn't something that I would expect out of a Castlevania game, and at times made me wish that the game had just stuck to the castle setting. Speaking of the enemies, I really enjoyed the way that they were all designed, especially the bosses. I did wish the game hadn't made each boss battle so straightforward. It would have been nice if each boss battle required a unique strategy in order to overcome, instead of just attacking them to win. Regardless, I still enjoyed the fights, which was due in large part to the combat system and powers that the game grants you. The game uses two basic types of attacks, direct and area of effect. You can also dodge and block, and timing both correctly provides a very rewarding moment as you take advantage of an opened opponent. The powers that the game gives you are really what made the game click for me. Dracula's whip is the basic power you'll have, but throughout the game you'll unlock the Void Sword with ice powers that also restores health with each successful hit, Chaos Claws with fire powers that can break shield protected enemies, a mist ability that turns Dracula into a mist to either avoid enemy attacks or pass through barred off areas, a double jump that is similar to what was in the first game, and as well as others. The combination of all these powers and the very easy to understand combat system really made me feel like a true badass. I love standing still while an enemy charged up an attack only to have it miss as I turned into a miss and followed up with some strikes of my own. It made me feel like the truly powerful Prince of Darkness himself. At the heart of this game is the combat scenarios, and I enjoyed beating down the lesser enemies as well as going toe-to-toe with the larger ones. A lot of the enemies will require some amount of strategy to overcome them, but not too much. Basically, you can get away with avoiding enemy attacks and smacking them with your whip, but things are a lot easier and much more fun when utilizing the other abilities that are at your disposal. And it also doesn't hurt that each attack and power looks awesome. There are items in the game that can help you in your battles, with one crystal that unlocks all powers at a master level for a limited time, an item to slow your enemies down, a health potion, as well as others. But my most favorite was the Dragon Talisman that allows Dracula to turn into a dragon and decimate the field. While you don't get control of the dragon form and the event is over after a short cutscene, it can really help you get out of tight situations. The game is an open world that really promotes exploration. A lot of areas won't be accessible at first, but once unlocking a special power later in the game, you can revisit previous areas to grind out more power-ups, obtain collectibles, or complete challenges. This game is a long game, with the main quest line on its own, and with these extra things, you'll get that much more out of it. Aside from the out-of-place modern-day setting and enemies, the thing that I absolutely hated about this game was the stealth areas that forces you to sneak around enemies. After feeling like a god against normal enemies, these brute types that the game forces you to sneak around annihilate you once you're spotted, and a lot of paths aren't as straightforward as you may want, which can have you stuck in these instances for quite a bit, as you will continually get frustrated trying to figure out the path forward. For a game that I mostly couldn't put down, the stealth areas really convinced me to take breaks as frustration and fear of breaking a controller had me putting the game down. It made sense early on in the game with Dracula being weak having just returned, but later in the game these parts still kept popping up. There aren't too many, but enough to aggravate. The game could have been better without them because in the end there was no real need for them. It was out of place, not needed, and frustrating, and also the worst part about the game. Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 has very few negatives, but this game looks great, sounds great, and plays great. The story was even very solid, and I really enjoyed the events leading up to the climax. As someone who never actually played the first game, but still knew the story, I had an absolute blast with this game. Excluding the stealth gameplay, this game's combat system and powers made me feel like I was actually Dracula. I thoroughly enjoyed this game, but understand why some Castlevania fans would say that as a Castlevania game, it's a step backwards. But the game still doesn't deserve the negative reviews that it's getting. For me, I would absolutely buy this game and play it again. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.